If you're on Twitter or any social media, Mexico is a hot topic right now, specifically the future of U.S.-Mexico relations. So while I know there's a couple of big topics that everybody wants to get into, I'm kind of going to try to start in order of how these things are taking place, going back to the title of this panel, El Mencho. So, Jaeson, what happened with the whole situation with the leader of CJNG, the most violent cartel that we face, a foreign terrorist organization in Mexico? How did this operation come about? What happened, and how did he die?
Thank you for the question. I will tell you, as Secretary Omar Harfuch told me, I had the great honor and opportunity to interview him last month in his office in Mexico City. And from the moment they received the intelligence, within 24 hours, El Mencho was dead. Within 2 hours of the operation launching, all major objectives had been met and he was killed. They utilized 6 helicopters from their Special Forces Corps, along with another unit of the National Guard, and used ground forces and high-flying aircraft, and of course some intelligence support from the United States to accomplish that mission. But I will also tell you very clearly here that while we in the United States, we focus on El Mencho as a major win for this endeavor. It is, make no doubt about it. Please don't take anything that away. But I will also say what he said, and that is that please don't get too caught up in the takedown of one capo, as we have seen many times in the past. Look at what has taken place in the national security strategy in Mexico and the massive wins there. Also take a look at what the United States government is doing with the terrorism designation in the bigger picture here for our hemisphere and the unity of effort that's taken place for the last 17 months. We are seeing things that we have never seen before, and Omar Harfuch mentioned that. You know, they've had a drop of homicides from their efforts by 44%. In the history of Mexico, he told me they have never seen that level of change. Not only that, look at the over 2,000 labs that they've hit in Mexico. Great intelligence coming from the Drug Enforcement Administration and what they're doing, working and collaborating as they always have down there. Major changes are taking impact, and I will say this again and again. The cartels as we know them, is over. And that change will be seen in the next 24 months. Remember, I said that.
The National Counterterrorism Strategy came out yesterday. It was about 16 pages, a lot of good stuff in there, but the president identified 3 top threats that he wants to tackle, and the first of that was narco-terrorism and transnational gangs. So we're talking about El Mencho, about CJNG. Could you please tell our audience what is CJNG, why are they a terrorist organization? But also, Jaeson just said something about how homicides in Mexico are down 40%. What exactly how do they measure homicides? Is that a true measure of success when it comes to Mexico cracking down on organized crime?
We have never had the engagement with Mexico like we do now. DEA is in lockstep. We meet with Omar regularly. So much cooperation from Mexico that we've never seen before. So when you see the operation with El Mencho, I mean, it started when President Trump came in. And Terry just reported we captured, and it was our first extradition with Terry at the boss, Queenie, who was one of the hitmen for the cartel. He's in prison here in the U.S., and he was a violent individual. So, as the captain said, this is a sequence of events that have happened. When you saw the takedown of Mencho, the country was in a state of shock. They did a few riots and burned some things, but they really were concerned about who's going to take over. We have that intel. We know who took over. But the bottom line is a 44% reduction in homicides. That's a huge win. I mean, we're talking about everything we do in this country to save American lives. Well, Omar and his folks are trying to save Mexican lives too, and that's important. But it's an evolving door in Mexico. These cartels are ever changing. So it's nice to be met with a cooperative effort from our Mexican counterparts.
Ammon, coming over to you, so when we're reading the counter-drug strategy, the counter-terrorism strategy, one thing we see a lot, and even in media, is are we treating cartels as foreign terror organizations, which the president has said they are, or are we still treating them as drug trafficking organizations?
So we've probably heard it on TV all the time that the border is more secure than ever, and that we usually use 2 metrics, and that is the number of illegal aliens that are coming across the border, which has dramatically decreased, and then also the fentanyl seizures. Now, however, unfortunately, the country of Mexico is actually the top marketplace in the world for its criminal enterprise. The cartels are in every single facet of society. If you all remember, the last election cycle was the deadliest election cycle in Mexico's history. Where were a majority of those deaths? They were at the local level. And you think, okay, if I wanted to control the population, would it be with just the federal government? No, it's going to be where the people are. If you look at any insurgency across the globe, you'll see that it's a population-centric movement. If I can control the populace, then I can control whatever I need to move, whether that is a product to the United States, whatever that product is, or I can have a sanctuary for all my operations inside of Mexico. Recently, Secretary Brooke Rollins on Monday talked about the 4 meat packers, right, and about the collusion between the meat packers. She said something interesting is she actually mentioned the Mexican cartels. Who here eats steak? Who eats steak? Raise your hand. You guys eat steak? All right. Who here knows where their steak came from? All right. Because we don't have labeling laws, then there's no mandatory country of origin labeling on your food. And so where do we get a majority of our meat? Well, it's from the Western Hemisphere. And then when you draw that back and you see, okay, well, who is in control of that trade? Well, Insight Crime has done a very good investigative report on this for the past few years, and has shown that the Mexican cartels completely control the cattle trade and traffic the cattle along the entire Western Hemisphere through the Darien Gap, just like the illegal aliens, with falsified documentation, just like they did with the illegal aliens. You name it. And then so when they get into Mexico, since we are trading live cattle with only 2 countries, Canada and Mexico, then what they do is they make sure that that cattle from whatever country they came from is now Mexican cattle. And so when they trade into the United States, you're now eating the fruits of terror. Whether that is cattle, your steak that you get, those of us in Texas, from HEB, right? The avocado that you eat, and you name it. So the cartels themselves, if we only measure our success based off of fentanyl seizures, labs being taken down, or any of these metrics where the cartels, yes, are completely in control over, and that 100% does decrease their power and governance. But who here owns a business? If you own a business and you sell a product, and now regulations make sure that that product is no longer available, you're just going to double down on other products, or you're going to find other ways to get your product to the consumer. And that's why we're starting to see super labs in Canada as well. If we continue to see the Mexican cartels as only drug trafficking organizations, then we're only going to use a small faction of what we have in terms of our capability and capacity to eradicate foreign terrorist organizations.
So, sir, yesterday the president said, we will no longer allow the cartels and gangs that have poisoned millions of Americans to operate freely in our region or to smuggle their drugs, weapons, or women and children victims of trafficking into our country. We will find them and kill them. And that is President Trump himself. And so Ammon's talking about using all of the tools at our disposal with an FTO designation. What tools does the United States have? How do we actively go against foreign terror organizations, not just operating as in our neighbor country, but in our own country, in every state?
Right now, we have cooperation with the Department of War like never before. We meet regularly. We're able to identify the plaza bosses. We're able to identify the cartel heads that are operating in particular states throughout Mexico. You saw this week or last week, we're starting to go after some of the politicos, indicting some of the politicos. Now in Mexico, they're resigning suddenly because they think they know the hammer's coming. They don't know what hammer's coming, but they know one's coming. But working with the Department of War throughout, all up from the north, from the southern part of the border up through the northern border, it gives us another very powerful tool to impact what these cartels can bring to our country. We've been doing this a long time. Never have we seen the cooperation between all the agencies. President Trump stood up to Homeland Security Task Forces, which conglomerate of all federal agencies, sharing intel, sharing resources. What that does is it gives our partners at the Department of War a target on the X, whether it's capture or kill, because President Trump's exactly right. They understand that. Mexican cartel leaders, they don't fear death. They fear U.S. prosecution. And so if we can keep that pressure on them, and they understand that when they do come in, I was reading this the other day, they all cooperate. And I'm sure you've done stories on it. When they come here, the baddest of baddest, Queenie, all these people, they all cooperate because they have to. Because they know if they don't, they're going to rot in their jail and die in their cell. The cooperation between our federal, state, and local agencies has never been better.
I want you to really think for a second how important what we just heard from him was. We work as the DEA every single day with the Department of War and the United States intelligence agencies to put X's on foreheads. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the backbone of why we worked 8 years to get the Mexican cartels designated as foreign terrorist organizations, which then from there gave President Trump Article 2 powers to do what he needs to do on this subject. And then from there, the unlawful enemy combatants, full spectrum operations, where you take men from the Drug Enforcement Administration, the FBI, and the CIA and other intelligence components who have done this for decades and failed with an investigative model, can now use their experience to drive operations for the Department of War and finally put this thing to an end. Now, I'm not saying we're going to stop the crime problem in Mexico. What I'm trying to articulate here is that the tools of national power, full spectrum operations, are here. We have it. What we were failing for so long that is not articulated well is our Department of Justice. It moves slow by design. And when you're fighting and listening to these cartels, and I spent years trying to go after Lascano, Miguel Trevino, and his brother Omar, who were absolute sadists, killing sometimes in a night hundreds of people. And the intelligence agencies we would give intel to would say, Jaeson, we want to do more than write an intel report, but that's about all we can do. So then we would share that intelligence to Mexico to try to drive operations. Now that the CIA, not that they haven't been down there, we all know they have, but now it's come out publicly, which I would never talk about publicly except that what happened. It's very clear that a whole new level of CIA is operating in Mexico. Please understand, with what we have with Omar Harfuch and what we have with these new authorities, we are in a place as America and with our partners in Mexico we have never been before. And I've embedded with the Mexican government now 5 times in 13 months. It's humbling to see their military and our military working together to do Operation Hold the Line together, a hold the line model at the border. It's humbling to go down there and see these soldiers fighting and going after these labs. And I've been to some of these labs. They are no joke. This is on another level. So where I'm going with this, I can't tell you how great this is to hear what he has to say today. And it fundamentally changes the game. We are in a whole new realm. And for the cartels, I promised them for a very long time, their end was coming. And this is the beginning of it. And we all need to look at what's coming in the near future.
Any cooperation that we're getting from our Mexican neighbors is progress. But we still know the Morena party is in power, and we know how much they're fighting back against any sort of U.S. help or intervention. How do we operate in good faith when we know the shortcomings and the failings of the Morena party and the increasing rule that they have in their own country, and that they don't seem to actually want to fight cartels to an extent?
It's like dealing, unfortunately, with Afghanistan. Our failures or our successes in Afghanistan, you can parallel what we're doing in Mexico with that in terms of the amount of corruption from the bottom all the way to the top. It may be better now in terms of collaboration, but we're not dealing with like a 1980s or early 90s Colombia where we're going after Pablo Escobar. Who here has ever seen the TV show Narcos? Right? So if you've watched the TV show Narcos, where the U.S. military was going down there and conducting operations, going after an insurgency within their own country and doing so, we are seeing progress towards that. But as President Sheinbaum said, she's not going to allow an overt amount of soldiers coming in and breaking their quote-unquote sovereignty into this nation. How do you work with a corrupt government? Well, you don't follow the Afghan model. What we just did with the Sinaloa governor, I think, is a step in the right direction. We continue to put indictments on all those within Morena that we have intelligence on, that we go after. And so we're going to see this, but we're now in a dilemma. We know that we're next to a narco state. It's a failing or failed state. They even declared their own state of Tamaulipas has failed in 2011 when Jaeson was still a DPS captain, where the city of Allende was completely wiped out by the Mexican cartels, where they guisoed almost every man, woman, and child. Tamaulipas declared that it was ungovernable. The Zetas had complete control. Fast forward to today. We already knew they were FTOs back then, but fast forward to today, we're now in a sticky situation where these cartels are so far past foreign terrorist organizations. They now control every aspect of society from the local all the way up. We have a water problem on our southern border in Texas. Who uses a lot of that water for their opiates in all the fields? The Mexican cartels do, with the illegal wells. So you got to look at how many different aspects the cartels control from the bottom all the way to up. And how do you deal with that level of corruption with a country that we share a 1,900-mile border with?
So, Ammon, you brought me to my next point where you talked about the recent indictment in the news, kind of a little bit of a big deal going on there. Is this the first time that the United States has indicted a sitting elected official in Mexico? And just to recap, the indictment said to protect and grow this drug trafficking empire, the cartel has partnered with corrupt politicians. So what now? What does that mean? We know what Scheinbaum is saying, but what does it mean for us?
I think the indictment, it demonstrates that nobody is outside the rule of law. When we deal with Omar and our Mexican counterparts, they see this as very positive. You know, you had very little demonstration after Mencho was killed, displaying that the people are kind of tired of this. And he was right. There's corruption's from top up in Mexico. But there's some really good people that want to see their country come out of this. And that's the ones that we're partnering with. So I think you'll see more. It's remarkable. A lot of them are resigning without being indicted. I think we'll see more of that. I'll just tell you, hold my beer. Watch and see.
So, Jaeson, coming back over here, like I said, President Scheinbaum has had the reaction that we expected her to have to the indictment. But I think this presents her with either an opportunity that she could use in a turning point to really crack down on corruption, or she can do what leaders before her have done and close ranks in the face of the U.S. accusations. What do you think is going to happen with this indictment?
I'm not worried about the current indictments. It's what's going to be revealed in the future, and making sure that the Department of Justice is on the right path there. Here's what I mean by that. If you remember the indictment of Cienfuegos and the arrest of him, it really caused a massive rift between our two countries. I'm not saying don't go after those who are corrupt. What I'm saying is, do we go after those guys first, or do we put them on the back burner? And what I mean by that is this. Who is sustaining the ability for these cartels to operate? Governors, definitely, like the one in Sinaloa, right? And many other governors that need to be taken down. Those are the tripwires. And we talk about them as the company. And when you sit down and you talk to these cartel members, they talk about it as the company. Publicly, we hear about the Sicarios and all of these guys who whack people's heads. They mean nothing. That's not who we need to stay laser focused on. It is those who are within the syndicates that keep the sustainability of these organizations going. Let's just say DOJ released an indictment on AMLO. That would do absolutely nothing to crush the cartels. Not saying we don't need to get those people, but what I'm trying to articulate is we need to be laser focused on who we go after. Specifically, we've got the Department of War, we've got the United States intelligence agencies. We're at a point right now where we could really do great things together with Mexico. And I'm going to say this again and again, with Omar Harfuch leading the way. His background is very unique. And when I talked to him, I asked him this question, ladies and gentlemen. I said, sir, I've seen for the last year you have focused on the logistical capabilities of these cartels. Am I right? He said, yes, we've hit the labs. We're going after the chemical precursors. I said, but in 2026, I see you've made an adjustment. I see you've gone after El Mencho. I listed a couple of other names. My question to you is, are you going after the company? the crooked politicians sustaining their operations? Are you going after the CPAs and those rotten lawyers who have protected them? And he told me straight out, that's exactly what they're doing. And what he described them as a different type of criminal. And you just use different tools to go after them.